Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase, and a Story. I'm Anton van Ben. This is a podcast about starting over. It is about what it takes to leave the familiar behind and the courage it takes to begin again in a land that isn't yet home. Together with my co-host Ben Liebenberg, we explore the untold stories of migration. Not just where people went, but why they left, what they held on to, and what they've had to let go. Each episode, we sit down with someone who's made that leap. Someone who's left behind not just places, but languages, careers, communities, and sometimes even parts of themselves. They share what called them forward, what nearly held them back, and what they've come to understand about identity, belonging, and starting again. Produced in partnership with Southern Crossings, a community for South Africans forging new lives in Australia, this podcast is a place to feel seen, heard, and understood. Because this isn't just about visas or paperwork. It's about identity, loss, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life piece by piece. So wherever you are on your journey, arriving, settling, or still thinking about it, welcome. This is where stories connect us all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This information to customers travelling on the Land Airways flight LA 800 approach Denver, Qantas 321, service to Auckland and Santiago. If you use my boarding pass,
So we are now in 2026, and this is our first recording that we're making of the new year. Ben and I just completed, it felt like yesterday when we completed our last episode of 2025. That was episode 19 of A Stranger, a Suitcase, and a Story. And today we have a really special guest here that I'm going to introduce to you now. His name is, he's Dr. Manny Pohl, and you'd wonder what Manny stands for. So Manny stands for Emmanuel, but he'll tell you that the only person that ever used that name was his mother. So Manny's story begins in South Africa with a childhood shaped by realities in the Blyvooruitzicht gold mine near Carletonville, a place that probably and definitely leaves a mark on you for him to put that into his bio for sure. He also boarded at King Edward or Kes school in Johannesburg, carrying that blend of independence and grit in his early life. When it came to choosing a new country, Manny didn't move for adventure or a vague idea of change. He moved for his three sons. He wanted to give them the best that life could offer, and he chose Australia. And even other pathways open to him in the UK and United States were there, but he wanted to come to Australia. He's living on the Gold Coast ever since and finding his feet the way that many people do, through business, connections, community, and sport. The things that help you feel known in a new place. Along the way, Manny built a significant leadership career, recognized at the highest levels, including being named a Freeman of the City of London, and later appointed a member of the Order of Australia for his contributions to the Australia finance industry. But Manny, what I love most about when I ask you about what you carried with you, it's not a thing, it's a principle. And he says that it's better to sleep well than to eat well. And that, in my mind, is a reminder that a real measure of success is what you can live with when the day is done. So welcome, Manny, and welcome to our first episode of 2026. We're really stoked to have you here.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to be on board and being the 20th version. That's quite a milestone. I mean, normally it's 21 where you get out the champagne, but we'll do that on 20. Congratulations to you guys for putting this together because, as you said in the preamble, a lot of people would have said, where the hell were you guys when we were thinking about this? Because we'd love to have heard all about it. So, no, I'm delighted to be here. I hope I can contribute in some meaningful way. And if my story helps anybody, well, that'll be lovely.
I'm sure it will. And For those who have listened to our episodes before, we recently introduced what we call a suitcase moment. And so, in our podcast, the suitcase is both a physical and a metaphorical kind of suitcase. The things that you brought with you, or the things that you had to leave behind, and so many. One of the things that you talk about is the fact that you grew up in Blyvooruitzicht, or in the gold mine near Carletonville, and so perhaps we can anchor this episode there to start there to say the Blyvooruitzicht mine where you grew up, and to anybody who knows that, is in West-Wits. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, Manny, and talk a little bit about that place, and hopefully I'm right.
Sure.
It sits just south of Carletonville on the far western edge of Witwatersrand, and with the Middelvlei reefs that made South Africa synonymous with deep level gold. The Blyvooruitzicht was established in 1937, began milling in 1942, and produced over 1.5 million ounces in its first 7 years. It is in its first year in the London Stock Exchange, its share price rose 65-fold, and by 1950s, Blyvooruitzicht twice broke the world record for annual gold production. That's the scale of home for many South Africans from the West-Wits belt. But many, that's not the real story that I want to talk about, the suitcase moment. So let's go back 100 years in Victoria in 1851. Gold is discovered and Melbourne becomes a magnet. Across that same decade, about 500,000 people, 500,000, arrive in Victoria. You can trace a South African thread also right in the shipping pages. In 1853, Melbourne newspapers list vessels from Cape of Good Hope bringing passengers. The sailing vessels Diane on 2nd of August, steamers and other vessels like the Osmanli and the Douglas on nearby dates. So, Cape to Melbourne traffic into the rush is on the record. And on the ground, the story is Ballarat and Bendigo turning from diggings into towns. Shallow claims at first, then quartz reefs as the capital and technology arrive. Supply depots, offices and bureaucracy. Different to South Africa, South Africa's latest deep-level mines, but the logic is familiar. Grades and ounces, risk and reward, communities forming around hard work. So when we talk about South Africa and Australia, we can point to this earlier link. Ships routing via the Cape feeding Melbourne's boom, and people, some with mining experience, many probably without, taking their chances on Victoria ground. So it's a bridge between two gold worlds, 19th century Victoria and 20th century West-Wits. And so that's where we sort of start. Manny, tell us a little bit about how you're growing up and in that area.
I think, you've clearly done quite a bit more research than I've ever done into the gold industry, and but my sense of one of the fundamental differences between what existed in South Africa and here in Australia was that with these deep level mines, and obviously very lucrative mines, a community was built.
Yes.
Where they invested in the infrastructure. I mean, we had sports fields, we had a recreation hall, we had an Olympic-sized swimming pool on the mine, we had and there was a golf course which a couple of South African golfers obviously learned their trade or practiced their sport. So we had this community that was built up. The modern version in Australia is sort of fly in, fly out. There's no real sense of community. And, all the people that we grew up with on the mines, I'm still friendly with a couple of them to this day. We went to school I only went from standard 2 to standard 5, and then I went to Kes, as you said. But still, my parents remained living on the mine until after I graduated from university. And I used to go back every weekend or alternate weekend. And then you mingle with the guys that went to the local school. So there was a massive sense of community. And I mean, the demise of those old mines, I've been back to Blyvooruitzicht, so it's just actually heart-rendering when you see what's happened. And there's nothing there but all these old derelict houses and things. And I mean, I understand that you got a wasting asset, and when it's wasted, it's wasted. But certainly the sense of belonging and the lovely memories that I have of Blyvooruitzicht. I'm not sure whether you get that amongst Australians who were in the mining industry here, because as I said, fly in, fly out, you don't get that sense of community that we were all brought up in.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And so that's how you grew up, and I had sensed that kind of set you for what you wanted to achieve with your own family later on, right?
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, you're right. It's kind of extended all the way through. I mean, let's wind the clock a bit forward from the days when I was at school and being brought up in Blyvooruitzicht. I mean, I was still involved in the community when I played soccer for Western Transvaal, and I used to go back to the mine and play with the guys that I grew up with, even though I was at university or whatever. Years later, I was a partner in Davis Borkham Hair, and the partners were educating their kids in London or the United States or wherever.
Yes.
And my wife, to give them a foot in potentially some new world that they could then make a mark. And my wife and I said, we're not doing that. We brought up 3 boys. We've been involved with them from day one in sport, all that sort of stuff, as most South Africans are. And there was no way we were going to send the kids away and we would go together. So it was about how we keep the family together and going to the place where we believed the family would stay together and continue to build on that. So you're quite right, Anton, in listening to me talking about Blyvooruitzicht from those early days. And as I said, I used to go back way until when I was in university, go and play soccer with the guys that I grew up, or play cricket with them on, they had limited expertise in various sports, be it rugby, cricket, or soccer. And after I was in the Navy as a PDI, so you kind of learned skills in all of those. And I'd go back on the weekend and play with the local team, and then I'd go back to Joburg again, to university. So, yeah, there was always this movement back to Blyvooruitzicht, and it was a lovely part of my life, and I think very fondly of it.
Yeah, and I think, Ben, we're talking about community. The whole point that Manny was making is the importance of community, and then the issue about the same mining situation doesn't exist here in Australia, right? It's fly in and fly out a lot of the times, and it's very different. And so I think there's a large chunk of people in South Africa that grew up this way, in those mining towns, and you had the house with a mining captain, and you heard all about those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, when we arrived, I was in Standard 2, if my memory is correct, and we lived initially in sort of the extreme part of the mining town, which was something Crescent, South something Crescent. And then as my dad got promoted from being a shift boss to being a underground manager to being a sectional manager, so you moved through the town, eventually ended up in the main street in the town.
You move from suburb to suburb, do you?
Yeah.
Very good.
Where you lived, you knew where you were in the pecking order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the closer you were to the golf course, the more higher you were in the management ranks. So yeah, that's the way it worked,
Yeah. Still does, doesn't it?
I think so. So Manny, did you have any siblings?
Yeah, I've got a brother and a sister. My sister lives in the United States. My brother, he taught English around the globe, but he's back in South Africa now, lives in the Bluff in Durban.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and he went to Kes as well. So we both sort of followed through. My dad was he was brought up in Johannesburg. His dad worked in Rand Crown Mines, as did he, and then we moved to Blyvooruitzicht and the rest of it. But he was a Parktown old boy, Parktown High School, and captained their rugby team, and I don't think he captained the cricket team. And he always wanted me to go to Parktown, but they never had a boarding school. So with us living in Carletonville, I couldn't go to his old school, so I ended up going to Kes. So I joined the dark side, as he always said.
For sure.
That's right.
For sure.
So yeah, sorry, Ben.
No, good. No, I understand 100%, being a Paul boy, I do exactly understand where you come from.
Those old rivalries.
Yes, exactly.
he used to tell me how they used to steal the school mascot and stand on the diving board and throw them in the pool, and then the kids guys would almost burst into tears because their favorite teddy bear had now been ruined or something. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And sport was a big part of your life during that time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Carletonville was a big mining town. I mean, you had Western Deep Levels, you had West Driefontein, you had Doornfontein and Blyvooruitzicht. And there were a lot of families there and a lot of kids, and it was highly competitive. And I was very competitive in sport, which is part of the reason why I managed to get into Kes as a boarder, because it was quite a selective place. So, and my dad, as I said, was really talented. He unfortunately, he had Hansi Olaf, who everybody said was never as good as my dad at rugby, but my dad, and he went on to play for the Springboks. My dad never did, because in under 21, he was tackled by obviously some big guy and smashed his knees, and he had cartilages taken out of both of them, and he could never ever run again because his knee used to just go up like that. These days it's like keyhole surgery, and it's not a major, but it buggered him up forever. And he could play a bit of cricket, but not even. I mean, even running on the cricket pitch was not pleasant for him. So, yeah, he was a great sportsman, but never really achieved where he should have. So, but he always had a love for sport, so it was always part of the household. And so I grew up in that. And then going to Kes, which is very sport orientated. I mean, this year it was voted the best school in South Africa for sport, which surprised me because the first rugby team had the worst season in a number of years.
Yeah.
But there's somebody who ranks them from 1 to 500 or something, and they got the accolade. So it was always been very part of my life. When I went to the Navy, I was fortunate to be to do the PDI course. So I was a PDI in the Navy when we all did national service.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always been a big part of my life. And certainly when I came to Australia, and then you kind of arrive, and then 2 weeks later the Blue Bulls are on tour to play the Reds, and you meet a couple of people there, and you've got a funny accent and then they recognize that you've moved here from South Africa. You're already starting to talk to people that are like-minded. So yeah, sport kind of opens up a lot of doors and enables you to settle quicker, as does business connections and the way you go about your business day. So yeah, sport has been a massive part of my life.
No, definitely. I always say to the guys, specifically if you're immigrating, if you can play sport, participate, because that's a really easy avenue to assimilate. But and also for the kids, I don't know if your kids carried on with it, but I mean, we made very good friends around the rugby field, watching my son play and going away with dads on trips and that kind of thing. So that made it much easier for us, to assimilate into society in Australia.
Talking about Kes and things, I mean, there's so much to talk about. We came to Australia about 9 months before we actually formally emigrated, on one of those, what they called LSD, look, see, and fire. And so we started the trip on the Gold Coast at SeaWorld, which was a big tourist attraction. And I had the whole family with me. And I happened to pick up the newspaper, and there was an advertisement by Westpac. And so I responded to the ad, and then I got a message that said, can you please phone this guy? And I think his first name was Ian, but his surname was definitely Cormac. Please phone him at this number. And I mean, we didn't have mobile phones in those days. And I got this message while I was sitting at the pool with the kids. So I went and jumped in the call box, which was nearby, and dialed the number and was putting 10 cent or tickies in or whatever it was. And he duly interviewed me. And at the end of it, offered me the job, which is what I accepted, and that's what prompted the immigration shortly thereafter. But leading on from the earlier story, I had a look at the Southport School here on the Gold Coast, and obviously looked at a couple of Brisbane schools, because it was all about the family.
Yeah.
And I took one look at it. It was like the Milner schools in South Africa, like the Kes, the JP schools in Johannesburg that were all of that ilk. The GPS schools are the same thing here. It's exactly the same. Boys' schools where you bring them up, teaching them how to play sport, get their mind off girls and the rest of it, and hopefully they learn something along the way. So I then immediately said, okay, right. I accepted the position with Westpac in Brisbane, and the boys went to the Southport School, and they went all the way through, and then obviously went to university. So, yeah, that's the kind of family link, but also the school link, because that was important to me, and that's why we ended up where we did, was because of the school. Um, Most people say, what brought you to the Gold Coast? It was the school. If TSS was in somewhere else, we probably would have gone somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting. If I can take you a little bit back, I think
Sure.
that you you're very much involved and have been in for years, well, ever since. I mean, you talk about Westpac coming here, so finance is your game.
Yeah.
But that's not that's not what you studied, right? When you
No.
started off, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I was at school, I went and had an aptitude test, and I was really good at maths and science. I was useless. I was doing Latin at school. I was useless at Latin. Um, hated history and quite enjoyed geography. And I did the aptitude test, and they said I should become a chemical engineer. I thought, oh no, that doesn't grab me. And then about third on the list was engineering, electrical and mechanical. So I thought, okay, that's not a bad idea. My uncle was a mechanical engineer, and I was always tinkering at school. I was always involved in doing the lights for the plays and helping the master with replacing light bulbs, all that sort of rubbish. So I kind of had an affinity for it. So I then went to university. I went to Wits. I got accepted based on my maths and science. And my dad said to me, "Listen, sunshine, I'll pay for your first year, and then after that you're on your own. I can't afford to pay for anything more than 1 year." So he did that. He paid for me to stay in an apartment, paid for the university fees, and as a result of my results at the end of the first year, I got a bursary from the Chamber of Mines. And so they paid for the remainder of my engineering, and I did electrical engineering, majoring in acoustics and microwave. And when I came out, nobody would hire me because what the hell was acoustics and microwave? And so I also had to repay the bursary, and I knew that SAPI was part of the general mining world, and they were looking for junior engineers at their Enstra mill. So I applied for that, and I got that. So somebody who majored in microwave and acoustics ended up being a factory engineer, designing 132 kV circuits and high voltage stuff, which is completely the other end of the spectrum. But anyway, that's where I could get a job. So that's where I started working at Enstra and SAPI out at Springs in the Far East. But then I practiced as an electrical engineer for a while. I did an MBA in between, and that's a whole other story, which you probably might want to hear about. But over to you if I've said
No,
anything that
we
interests
we definitely want to. Just I I remember, you talk about what your dad did with your studying. Mine was not a dissimilar trajectory because I went to the army first, and my second year in the army, I was away from South Africa for probably 14 months during that time across the border, and so you get at that time a lot of money every month. I think I got something like 410 rand a month. I
Wow.
remember that. I mean, that time it was a lot of money, and so I brought back all of that money, and I paid for my first year university. I bought myself a second-hand car and a hi-fi, and so those were the three things that was the most important. Well, I think I bought the hi-fi first. So, and then my second and third years and so on, I paid for myself because I worked part-time and I had my own little business with a friend of mine. And then what then happened is after all of that, when I got my degree, my father paid me back all the money. And he said, "Well done. Here's it back to you." And
Yeah,
so,
that's cool.
yeah, that was cool. So, but anyway, so how did the transition happen then between engineering and where you are now? Was that through the MBA part?
Yeah, no, definitely it was. I mean, after SAPI, I then worked for Louis Late for a while in his Clercorp factory as the engineer of the factory.
Yes.
What did they make?
And
Sorry, that's not the brewery ad? Which one?
fertilizer.
Oh, the fertilizer.
Fer-
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
fertilizer. Well, fertilizer is what most people think we did there, which we did do. I mean, we produced a lot of fertilizer. But in the mechanical workshops, we actually produced weapons.
Mm.
We had a whole big machine shop and made a couple of guns for the government. So we did a few things there.
Mm.
But yes, I was practicing as an engineer, and because I had the MBA, I was always on the lookout to branch out into business. And Hubert Davies had established a management services division where they were hiring young guns that had the academic qualifications to come in and identify takeover opportunities. Because in those days, you had to take things over. There was no way of expanding outside of the country.
Mm.
So I joined Hubert Davies in the management services division, and we looked at Hawker Siddeley, acquiring that business at that time. And there was a company in the group called Reef Electrical, and the then finance director made a massive cock up. I can't remember the exact details, but he got marched on, and then Bill Blannon, who was the MD of Blue Circle, said to me, "Listen, you majored in finance at the MBA." I said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Right, you're the financial director of Reef Electrical." I said, "Oh right, okay, cool." So I then had to roll my sleeves up, and obviously I did a pretty good job because I was then promoted to managing director about a year later, because I tidied up all the issues that we found. It got some of the cost accounting back on track, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so that's how I got into that, was just purely through the train or the qualification that I had. I had no practical training whatsoever. I was an electrical engineer, but I got thrown in the deep end because I supposedly understood finance, because of the MBA, which I did. I mean, we had fabulous training by a guy called McGregor, in terms of accounting and finance. So yeah, I clearly did a good job, which Blue Circle recognized.
So from there, I mean, I'm trying to get a little bit of a timeline. So then you transition into finance, and from there you never left. But at what point did you after that consider going overseas during that time?
Yeah. I mean that. So let me just finish that last bit about South Africa. So from my Blue Circle days, where I was involved in this team that were finding acquisitions for the group,
Yes.
to running a company, I then joined a stockbroking firm.
Mm.
And when I left South Africa, I left Davis Walkham Hare as the head of research, because my idea that, I mean, research in those days was a fairly commoditized thing, and you did a bit of economic discussion. And my idea was that if you buying and selling shares, you're buying and selling a company, you better understand the way the company works.
Mm.
And so I built up a team of guys that actually had cut their teeth as managers of businesses. I remember Tom Dale, he was a sectional manager at Western Areas, and I brought him in to be the gold analyst. So we got guys that actually understood business, didn't necessarily come from the broking world,
Mm.
to write about businesses and what was good about them and what was bad about them. And that kind of put me on the map in terms of those financial mail surveys in those days. And then I left South Africa in the role of head of research at Davis Walkham, and then came to Australia. As I said, I answered that ad. And so what prompted the decision was my wife and I were at a business dinner. Funny how you remember names. I forget a lot of names, but there are a few that I remember. We were at a business dinner with Rob Angel and Barry Swart. Rob Angel was the MD of Sasol at the time, and Barry Swart was the MD of First National Bank.
That's right.
And they were at that dinner, this is now 93, before even Nelson got out of jail or even thought about getting out of jail. And they already then were saying that if you were white male, you were going to go to the bottom of the food chain. Management was dominated by white men,
Mm.
and black females had the word, they were right down on the bottom, and that had to change. Firstly, you had to get blacks into management, and then you had to have women progress up the management chain. And I had 3 sons, and I sat at the dinner and I said, I was interrogated, and Barry Swart, I think at the time, said they weren't even hiring males anymore as a group policy.
Mm.
And we went home and I said to Gail, listen, I've got 3 sons. Who knows whether, how they're going to be able to shape it. I want to give them the best shot at it. So some of my partners were already, their kids were at Eton and all these fancy schools. And I said to Gail, we've got to get out of here. The boys and us, we've got to go so we can give them a shot at it. So
So
we did that.
how old were they then, man?
So
How old were the kids at that stage?
my youngest was about to start school. Jason would have been like 5. Hilton was going into high school, and the middle one was in the middle.
Okay.
So it also makes sense for that. So Hilton came and started high school here. Jason started primary school, and Jared was in the middle.
Mm.
So also the timing from that also kind of all fitted in. That it was sort of seamless for them, which is what I always wanted to do. I didn't want it to be a massive upheaval. I mean, it's upheaval enough when you go from primary to high school, but so he was just going from primary to high school in another continent. So
Yeah.
so what? Yeah.
Yeah, but the irony is that I found, and again, it's specific to different people, but with a lot of people we speak about is that how resilient the kids are. It's
Yeah.
really the bloody
Oh, yeah.
grown-ups that struggle. The kids they seem to just take it in their stride generally, not always, but they are. Kids are just so adaptable.
Yeah, no, that's right. As I was saying earlier to Anton before you came on, that spectrum of 2 to 10 years to settle, I was more like the 2 year because I came in. And sorry, a point that I'd like to make is that the school environment, when we arrived here, we arrived at the start of the school year, and as I said, Jason started at primary school, and they had a function to welcome the new parents at the school, and they were extremely welcoming, the PTA and all the people at the primary school. And when I started talking, they said, "Oh, you got a Southern accent? Yeah, you play rugby? Yep. Okay, right. You're coaching the grade ones tomorrow in Waller Rugby if you've got time." So immediately I was like sucked into the system,
Yeah.
which was what made it very easy for me. And also it made life a lot easier for Gail as well, because the school was, I mean, TSS is one of those schools where you just get drawn in. They've got a massive school sports program. They've got a program in just about everything. And they encourage people to get involved. So that was what made the transition, I thought, a lot easier. But obviously, being in business straight away into the finance industry, you meet a lot of interesting people. So, yeah, it was very easy for me. But, I just want to make that point about the school, dragging you in, which I think makes a big difference. If you get involved with the school community earlier on, that makes it a lot easier.
Mm.
Mm. So you came across your kids in the school. I mean, you and your wife picked the right school and your area, and was there a difference settling in for you to your wife coming to Australia, because you in a company now, right? And you got things to do.
Yeah, and also the company was based in Brisbane. We were living on the Gold Coast because of the school. So I commuted every day for about 15 years. Every morning I'd get up at 5, get in the car by 5:30, be in Brisbane by 6:30, and then leave 7 o'clock that night. I had a really good friend in South Africa, a guy called Dennis Finch, who owned the Mike's Kitchen. And he had an idea of opening these Mike's Kitchens around Australia and using that as a vehicle for people in South Africa from hospitality to immigrate. So he'd offer them a franchise, put together a deal, and then they would make it a lot easier. But it never ever so we opened the first Mike's Kitchen. I negotiated contracts and we set the thing up. But then there was a hell of a bun fight in South Africa, and he lost control of Mike's Kitchen, and so that whole vision that he had never materialized. And the couple or the family that were going to come and run the first Mike's Kitchen, they got cold feet, so they never came. And here I was sitting, having signed all these contracts. We had fitted the whole place. And I said to my wife, Gail, listen, you always wanted to be involved in business. here's a business. Take it and do what you can with it.
Wow.
And so that
Yes.
it's a massive success story here on the Gold Coast. It's still here today, and you can't get in for love or money, but that kind of helped her. But still, she had these really strong connections with friends and family in South Africa. So it took her a long time. Whereas I think maybe because I went to boarding school, you sever those sort of emotional ties when you're a young kid. Going to boarding school, and she didn't. She lived at home right until we got married. So I think it was a lot harder for her in that respect. Whereas if you go to boarding school, you kind of like toughen up, and then you go to the army or the navy, in my case, and you toughen up a bit more.
Yeah.
So we were a bit more resilient, and she took a bit of strain. But Mike's helped her get over that, I think, in a big way.
Yeah, I remember Mike sketching with fondness because it was probably our favorite hangout in Stellenbosch where I studied, and the red and
Oh yeah.
red and white table.
Well, you should come to Mike's on the Gold Coast.
Should.
It'll bring back those memories.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's still going today?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's an icon here on the Gold Coast. It's a major success story. Honestly, you can't get in. You got to book 2 weeks in advance. It's full every night. It's just goes crazy. It's renowned for the steak and ribs, and it's been here for 15, 20 years now.
And your wife has been running it since then?
So she got 2 young brothers from PE who were actually working. They worked at Mike's, and then they went to what was called Saddles.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
we remember
not
that
being-
too.
Yeah, so not knowing restaurants at all. Dennis said, "Look, I know these 2 young brothers who are at Saddles, and I think I can convince them to come." So he did, and they became partners in the restaurant. I mean, it struggled in the early year. I mean, the location was wrong for Australia. There were a million things that were wrong, which we had to fix. But they came on board, came here with the culture. They were restaurateurs. They knew how to run a restaurant. And we couldn't pay them a hell of a lot of money in the beginning. So I gave the 2 brothers half the equity in the business, and they've earned what their business has made since then. And they've done well for themselves. And yeah, the restaurant is still going strong.
Well, Ben, we need to go there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely.
But you better book 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah,
is
just
all
once
I
I will
can
name
say.
drop.
No,
Listen, we need
no,
to.
I know people. I know people that can get me in there, I'm sure.
I can't even get in, to be honest.
Oh, very good.
No, I mean, who would have thought? I mean, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. So is that really what got your wife to then settle? Because
Well, I think that in time. I mean, it got her mind off. I mean, I mean, I think if you've been in the military like we have, you get landed in somewhere and find your way home or whatever. And my wife is not that good at directions, whereas you can put me on the moon and I'll find my way home, which I'm sure is the same with you guys. And she recounts the story of she got in the car to go and buy groceries or something, and she got to wherever she was, and she couldn't find her way home. She had no idea how to get home. And she says that's like the worst thing in the world is where you are lost. You know you're lost, and you've got no idea how to get to where you want to go. So eventually she kind of like figured it out. So I think having a distraction like Mike, having something to do, and it was really tough in the early days, but also time. I mean, that heals a lot of things. So eventually time sort of healed the wound, and she went back fairly regularly to see her friends. And so, yeah, eventually, and I mean, she's perfectly settled. This is her home. She would never go and live in South Africa or even contemplate that. But it was difficult for her, whereas for me, geez, right from day one, you got something to do, let's get on with it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. So initially, was there then a few opportunities that says go back to South Africa for a couple of weeks, and how did that feel going there and coming back again? Because I think from everybody else that we speak about, often the thing is that I think Margaret, our previous guest, said that, and she's quite a big person in terms of getting people across to Australia. Said that she tells people that first time that you go home, just remember that you'll see all the familiar things, and then it becomes problematic for you to come back. but eventually, if you stick it out, what was that like for you guys?
That's an interesting question. I've never asked my wife the question in that way. She went back fairly often. But as part of that kind of harsh reality, I said to her, listen, whenever you feel a longing to see your mom and your dad and your brothers and your friends, there's a ticket for you to go. So when that gets too much for you, or you're really missing them badly, we'll get you on a plane and you go back. And she would do that regularly, and she'd take the little one with her who could go because he was in grade 1. So Jace went with her quite a lot in the early years, and she would go probably twice a year or maybe 3 times a year when there was something major like a birthday or something. And she said that because there was never this loss of roots, or there was never the severing of the relationship. And I mean, a lot of our friends in South Africa, in fact, we always go back, and then there's a hell of a big party because we bring everybody together. So Gail did that fairly often, and I think it softened the blow because she would go there, spend maybe 10 days with her mom and dad, and then, as is the case, they kind of like start to aggravate you because they want to tell you what to do, etc. And I'd be here with the boys, so she'd say, oh, I've had enough, I'm going back. And then she'd be all right for 6 months, and then she'd miss them again and then get on a plane. So, I mean, it's different for us, but that kind of worked for us, I think.
No,
Yeah,
agree. I actually found, personally, we found, when we got here, you didn't know where to go. Trying, as you say, you're totally lost. You don't know where to turn. Lots of insecurities. But when we went back to South Africa, and we went back as well, I think very early on, after about a year, we went. And when we came back, we actually landed on the airport. We got into the car. We know exactly where to drive. We got into the house. It was our furniture. It was our bed. It was everything. And it actually made it much easier for us after the first visit back to South Africa, coming back here. Then everything was familiar, and it felt.
That's an interesting point. After I accepted the position, that was in like April. I then officially left South Africa in the July and came to take up the job. And Gail and the kids finished the year in South Africa, and they came in the December, or actually in the January. But they packed up everything and sent it in the containers like you do. And she stayed with her best friend for the remaining period. I then had bought a home here on the Gold Coast. The container arrived, and all our furniture and everything that we had in South Africa was put in the new house. And they left South Africa from their mate's house, Alison, who was her best friend, and arrived in Australia to all their home and all their bicycles and everything that they had in South Africa. They came straight into it, albeit in a new building, but everything else that was familiar to them was there. And again, I think that made it a lot easier. So they kind of left home in South Africa and arrived at home in Australia with all the stuff that was familiar, albeit that it was in a strange neighborhood, and the people wasn't anybody they knew. So, I think with hindsight, it all kind of worked, and from my point of view, when the boys are settled, as you said, kids are resilient. They went to TSS and were straight in, no issues, and that makes it a lot easier.
So you bought the house after you came and before your wife arrived, right?
Yeah.
Who made that decision?
Well, I'd done a bit of homework, and then she came out to see me. I think it was in like the September.
Sorry, it's a bit of it's a leading question because I'm not sure what the answer is.
She certainly signed off on it. But and I said to her, look, I want a home for you guys to come to. So she said, okay, now this one's fine. She says, how long are you intending to stay? I said, no, just a couple of years. Well, we stayed there like 10 years, and she never let me forget it. That was supposed to be like a 1-year stint. But I was too busy trying to, get the business going and all the rest of it. But yeah.
So how long did you stay with Westpac for when you came over?
No, I was only there for about a year. I mean, I hope none of the Westpac people are listening to this, but I found the organization, from an investment point of view, they were brain dead. They were actually doing passive management and claiming to be active managers. And so I got really frustrated in a short period. But then a fascinating thing happened. I mean, I don't know whether this is the Suitcase moment or whatever, but when I was a partner at Davis Borkham, we were the only brokers to De Beers and Anglo American, and Liberty Life for that matter. And in London, Casino were the only brokers to Anglo American and De Beers in London. So we obviously worked together with them on a lot of deals like the Menorca deal, et cetera, et cetera. And the partner at Casino was a guy called Christopher Palmer Tompkinson, who was responsible for liaising with Africa. And I was between London and South Africa quite often on these deals and doing various things with them. And when I emigrated, in those days, you still wrote letters. He wrote a letter to Stephen Wilson and said to Stephen, there's this fellow from Davis Borkham who I've worked with for a long time, Manny Pohl. You should try and get hold of him, which is what he did. And he and I had a coffee, and I had this idea of taking some of the things that we did in South Africa and doing them here in Australia, because they didn't. The industry was dominated by unit trusts. So he and I had a chat, and then he said to me, why don't you come and set this up within the Wilson HTM world, which is what I did. So that whole thing happened because of a guy in London who wrote a letter to a guy in Australia.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So that was that then the sort of trigger that that got you out of corporate, and you've not gone back, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I joined Wilson HTM as a sole employee. Kind of started a division, and that grew, and then it became we set up a company. It became a wholly owned subsidiary, and then bought equity in the subsidiary, and then there were some issues around that. So I then sold them my stake, because I had I think it was 20% of it, and then set up EC Pohl & Co. with my middle son, and then the rest is history. So, but no, it was actually that letter that started the whole thing.
That's amazing. And so I'm hearing two kind of things that happened. The one was somebody saying to you, well, you I know you're an electrical engineer, but I need a finance person. And that sets you into finance, and then you're going to a corporate, and as you say, what it was like, and then somebody writes a letter, and there you are. And it's kind of it's these interesting things. But I would imagine also, Manny, I mean, from a human point of view, one has got to be in the right place at the right time, right? And you got to you got to know and do the right things to get there, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I suppose, I mean, there's been a couple of things that have happened that I've just done them. I mean, an interesting one, which is unrelated to anything we're talking about, but years later, my wife, when I was with Blue Circle running Reef Electrical, we had a factory that had about 1 million things that we were making, and it was very difficult to actually make a decent return on equity for the business. And Eskom at the time had put out a tender for 100 kV transformer. So I went and saw the guy, and you had a tender in those days. So I said to him, look, I need to fill this factory, and you've got a tender for these 100 kV. What if you kind of double the quantity, and I give you a super special price, but you give me the contract to manufacture them over a 3-year period? It fills my factory with one product, and then we can hone it and get it down to the best price and make the most money out of it for us, and you get a pretty good deal for Eskom. So he said, no, that's fine. So he wrote the contract, I signed it. I wanted to get this thing done before he changed his mind. And I went to the board and I put this contract on the table, and the chairman absolutely tore a strip off me. And he said, what the hell did you do? I said, I filled the factory. What's the problem with a reasonable price transformer? He said, but this is worth whatever the millions were. It's 10 times more than your authority level. I said to him, well, but I was in a negotiating position, and I needed to make a call because I'm sure this deal was going to go away. So I made the call and I signed it. We're going to make a bucket of money out of this. So yeah, I'm sorry I exceeded my limit, but I needed to do that at the time. I said, well, I certainly can't condone it, and we're going to reprimand you for not referring to the board. And I turned over, I tore paper out of the board pack, and I said, I hereby resign. I gave it to him and I walked out. Never went back. And I went home, and Gail said to me years later, he says, you walked in that day, you never came home for lunch because you're always busy, and all of a sudden you pitch up for lunch.
Right.
And I asked you, why are you here? And you said, well, I've resigned. And she said, oh. She said, did you realize that I was 8 months pregnant with our eldest son, and you just resigned? She says, what kind of idiot are you? How can you do that? I said, well, you got to make a call sometimes in life, and I made a call, and I'm out of there. So sometimes things just happen, and you see that's the right thing to do, and you just get on and do it, and that's kind of been me. So you're right. You got to be in the right place at the right time, but you also have to recognize it and be able to pull the trigger, I think.
What if you have to say to yourself, looking back and say, because you clearly, when you make those decisions, you're brave and courageous to make them, and you don't look back. In the moment, it's right. So where does that come from, Manny?
Sure. I don't know. I think it's the way you've been brought up. I think it's the education. I think what drives you is, when I talk to the guys in our business here, I say, and interesting enough, I was chair of the audit committee at the university, at Bond University, and we were having a strategic think about where the university should go and the amount of money they were going to spend, and there was this really optimistic budget that was going to be spent. And one of the people around the table said, well, I think we should ask the chair of the audit committee what he thinks about spending all this money. And I said to him, well, it's very easy to make that call because we just have to go back to the basic principles that this university operates on, which is to the best by our students. And we need to do these things because the offering we need needs to be improved. And this is how we're going to do it. So we need to do this. So if there's a constraint on the funding, we got to figure out how to deliver on that. But the call is made by the ethos of the university and what you stand for. And I think that if you've got a good grounding with, a code of ethics, that kind of leads you to make the right call, because you've got the boundaries established, and you know that this is where you've got to go, and these are the things that you will do and that you won't do. And I think that guides you. So you need those rails set up, I think, earlier on. And I was fortunate enough to have those set up through my background at working in or being brought up in a community environment like Blyvooruitzicht, and going to a school like KES, which actually does indoctrinate a way of thinking and a way of behaving. So, and I think that makes really difficult decisions easy at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then of course it makes you, flexible. Say flexible, it's more capable of adapting in all sorts of environments because the principle stays the same.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. That thing that you mentioned rather being about not eating well but sleeping well. I mean, you can interpret it along a lot of ways, but the way that I interpret it is that if you've got to walk away from a deal because if you do the deal you won't necessarily sleep well at night, then you rather want to sleep well at night.
Yeah, for sure. So I just want to maybe explore a little bit. So you come over to Australia, you're in the corporate environment, something you picked up, probably haven't thought about too much given how you got the job and that. How did you experience the working environment then in Australia compared to South Africa? And then when you went on your own, just through university and all other things, we've got a good network in South Africa. How did you establish your networks here, and how did you find it to do business between the two countries?
The worst thing is, when you're a partner at a firm like Davis Borkham, I could pick up the phone and get put through to Julian Ogilvy Thompson, who was the executive chairman of Anglo American. That's the firm had those sorts of connections. And if you're a partner on one, you're kind of linked into that. And then you arrive here in Australia and nobody will take your call. They don't know who you are. You talk with a funny accent. You live on the Gold Coast. It's kind of like it's the worst thing ever, especially if you're in the business world, because it's like all of a sudden you go from having a lot of open doors to having them all shut. And now you've got to, get out the blowtorch and cut the bloody hinges off and force the door open. It's the hardest thing. It was made a lot easier for me, I think, not from the corporate days, but when I joined Wilson HGM, Stephen Wilson, his family had been in Brisbane for many years. We're a very respected family. And he's the guy who received the letter. And he opened a lot of doors for me and introduced me to a lot of people. I think because earlier on in the piece, he realized that I was somebody similar to him. We both love rugby, we both love cricket, and we got talking about things. And I mean, to use the Aussie expression, I think he realized that I was a fair dinkum person. And he started to open the doors for me, and he opened them quicker than what I would have expected. I mean, I was invited into certain boards and things earlier on, which might not necessarily have happened had I not met him or not had him open the doors for me.
Yeah, and I think so. So what I think that's a good question, Ben, and I think that for people, when you listen to this podcast, I think that the important thing here is that it is you build your relationships as you go along, because you just don't know who you're going to need at what point in time in your life, and so I suppose.
Yep.
Well, when you tear a piece out of the board paper and the resign, well, you're not necessarily going to worry too much about that one, because it's not one that you're really concerned about. But then there's a whole lot of others that, as you go along in your career, you meet people, and I think that your success, what you're describing, at least your success here in Australia, is built on relationship. It's not, obviously the going in position is that you've got to know what you're talking about, but you got to, it's built on relationships.
Yep. No, that's absolutely right. Even walking out of the blue circle like I did, the chairman of that board, his boss was a guy called Trevor Coulson. He still communicated with me years later after that. So on a personal level, I think you got to treat people as you would want them to treat you. And I mean, to that point that you make, there was a particular guy within the Wilson world who most people didn't like, but I would always give him the time of day and talk to him. And when I used to get in early, there was an old guy who used to do the mail, and I would always walk up to him and say, "Good morning, how are you? And I'm going to get a coffee. Can I get you one?" And I think it was the only guy in the whole firm that ever bought him a coffee. And years later, the guy that nobody really liked ended up in a senior position in MLC awarding contracts. And we went to see him, and he said, and we got the contract, and who would have thought he would have ended up there? Would never have thought that. So, yeah, I mean, some of the decisions you make, people realize that they're made for a particular reason, and you've done them in all honesty and not trying to be nasty, but making a decision so you can move on. And people respect you for that, but it is about relationships and how people perceive you and how you deal with them. And I think if you deal with everybody in an appropriate way, the doors start to be open. And I think that was what was the big success for me here in Australia, is that, I mean, I am what I am, and people, I dealt with people in the right way. I don't think if you're arrogant, people recognize that. But if you're a nice person and you deal with people the way that you should, in a good sort of, I'm using the word Christian way of dealing with people, then I think they really act that way. So I think you need to come here with an open mind, be nice, understand that Australians are different in a lot of respects, respect that difference, and then but don't lose your background and what you stand for. And if you continue to be true to yourself, people recognize that and they're happy to go along with you.
Yeah. No, that sums it up pretty well. I think, it says it all, and couldn't have said it any better. It's such a valuable lesson to take, and for me, the thing that stands out just talking to you is just that whole thing about principle, because that framework that you set through principle is what makes all of this happen in the long run.
Yeah, Manny, and as we kind of getting to the end of the podcast, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I said in the beginning that you being named as a freeman of the City of London, and then later on being appointed as a member of the Order of Australia. So tell us a little bit about that, and how did that come about?
That again is primarily due to people, I mean, the Order of Australia, let's start with the second one first. How you get it, people have to nominate you for the award. You've no idea that it's going on in the background. And so it's like a community thing, but there needs to be quite a strong voice in the community for you to get that. And at the end of it, you get the award. You still don't know who nominated you, who seconded you, who did it, but there are people in the background that did that. So again, it's these relationships, and it's also based on the contribution that you make. And I think when you emigrate and you put your shoulder to the wheel and make a contribution, I think fellow Australians recognize that. I mean, I was involved in the school, I was involved in the university, I've been involved in not-for-profits, I was involved in the Barrier Reef, I've been involved in the Currumbin Wildlife Hospital, and it's all, free time, extra time you put into that, you try and do as best you can, and then people recognize it. So it's again these connections, people that gets you that accolade. The city was the same thing. I was involved, as I said, through business dealings with people in the city. And there I do know who put me up for that. It was a chap I'd done business with for many years who put me up for that. The funny thing about it, I mean, there's all these old English traditions of whether it's true or not, who knows, but there are supposedly 3 privileges that I get from being a freeman of the City of London.
Yeah. I'd like
One
to know
is
what that is.
what,
I've always wondered what you get.
Everyone knows if the-
I've always wondered what the privileges are. So I'm very interested in this one.
you get a certificate on that you can put on your wall that says you cannot use it to get anything. You're not allowed to use this to spoil yourself. According to mythology, the 3 privileges I have, one is that I can herd my sheep over the Bridge of London, which you're not allowed to do unless you're a freeman. You don't bring your goats and sheep to the city if you're a freeman. Secondly, if you're drunk and disorderly, the constabulary will take you home and not lock you up.
Oh, that's
And I haven't tried that one. And then the best privilege of all is if you're caught urinating in the Thames River, they will ignore it and not arrest you. I didn't know there was a crime to urinate in the Thames River, but anyway, I understand that it is. So those are the 3 privileges that I have.
fantastic.
Okay, great. No, Manny, it's been a wonderful conversation. You can't imagine that we've run through it. From our perspective, there's so much that we could talk about more. But what I really took out of this discussion from you is it started off in a community, and you are still in that community. You wouldn't have got a member of the Order of Australia if there's not a community around you that recognizes that and say, yes, this person, Manny, is not just about himself at all. In fact, he's about everybody else. And I think the other things that is so wonderful is this, I don't like the word authentic. I just don't know what other word there is, but, genuine.
Paid income. Paid income.
The behaviors, the things about being, recognize everybody around you. Some are cleaners and some are, CEOs, and they're all the same. They're all the same people, and you just never know who you're going to meet where, and so you're being, good to everybody, recognize everybody. And I think the other thing that I got out of this is, use the courage of your conviction. If you know a thing is right, it's right. Go for it. Even if, the decision is always yours, and there might be some difficulty on the other side of the decision. But as you say, you can sleep at night.
Can I relate one little story? It is a really funny and it's a lovely story in the context of apartheid South Africa.
Yes.
When I was working for Louis Late, the Klerkhoff factory was north of Modderfontein, and I used to go running in the fields to play foot. And I had my Wits tracksuit on, and I came back to my office, the electrical engineer's office, and I walked in, and there was 3 or 4 black guys in the office, which firstly you weren't allowed to be there as a black person, because the offices were for white employees. I mean, you would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But secondly, come in the engineer's office without making an appointment, and these guys were standing in my office. So I walked in there and I said, "Hey guys, listen, really, what are you doing here? I mean, it's something They said, I saw you running in the field with your Wits tracksuit on. I said, oh, yeah, yeah. I said, so what's that got to do with you being in my office? They said, well, we've got the soccer team. It's called the Triumph soccer team. And we've made it through to the finals of the knockout.
Right.
And we're not sure that we're going to be able to win it. And we recognize you from playing for Wits. We'd love you to come and coach us a little bit. So I said, oh. And because I was an engineer, all of the black stock were housed at a compound in not Natalspruit, Katlehong. And I could get a special permit to get in there because I was the electrical engineer. We had to maintain these things. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I used my permit to get in, and the SAP would let me in, no problem. And I coached them over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. And then came the final that they were playing in, which was in the single stadium in Carletonville. And they said, listen, would you come and watch us play? I said, oh, okay. Yeah, and I'll come without asking the questions first, just saying, yeah, okay. And then they said, we pick off at 10:30 on Thursday evening. What? Are you in the middle of Carletonville? So they said, yes, and we'll organize a pass, and we'd love you to be there. Oh, okay. So I've committed. We'll go. So I went home, and Gal said, you're going to be going where? In the middle of the night? I said, well, I told them I was going to come, so I'm going to go. So I get in my car, get to the stadium with my special pass, and the guard lets me into the stadium, and it's me with like 60,000 black people in, because I'm the only white guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there with the guy in front, and the team is starting to win and playing well, and then the crowd starts to sing, hey, Whitey, hey, Whitey. Hier kom groot kak, to use the South African expression. So I said to the coach, I said, listen, you guys are playing well, just follow what we've been training to do. I think I need to get back because I've got to be at the office early tomorrow. It's like midnight. I'm out of here. So I get to the security guy, and this noise is still going on. And I said to him, thanks for letting me out. I said, what? I can't hear, but what are they busy saying? He said, oh, no, they're just chanting the fullback's name. His nickname is Whitey. It had nothing to do with me.
There you off.
Yeah.
So that was me in the cup final, the Carletonville Cup final with the Triumph
fantastic.
soccer team.
Did
at
they
10 at midnight.
did they win, Manny?
They did win.
Yeah,
They
all
did
right.
win. Yeah, that's
Fantastic.
such a great story.
So many.
Well,
But
yeah,
listen, guys, I've enjoyed chatting to you.
Yeah, it was-
Thanks for the interaction, and I hope this is worthwhile and that your listeners
for sure.
get something out of it.
No, for sure, man. And, when Anton and I started this pod, we always said our pod is not so much about, what people are in terms of name and stature. It's more about people and what they are and what's inside of them, and not the achievements. But I must say, just, I was a bit late, but reading your bio and what you've done, I must congratulate you as a person of what you achieved. It's fantastic just to read, and it's quite humbling to read
thank
what
you.
you've done. It's you must be very proud of that, and you can be very proud of that because that's exceptional. And we're really
Yeah, no, thank
privileged to
you.
have somebody like you on the pod. It's
Oh, it's a
real
pleasure,
privilege.
and really, you guys are doing a great job, and thank you.
no,
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you, Manny. I really, really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the discussion. Been fantastic. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks. All the best.